The scream cracked the banquet hall like ice under a truck. Ava, a 28-year-old Latina waitress, froze with a tray of champagne. The projector blasted her baby photo above the head table. Senator Marcus Hale, a 58-year-old white male, raised his glass. He said to the daughter I lost and just found. Ava whispered, "I'm not yours," but the mic caught air instead. Crystal chimed as her hand shook, and a flute kissed the marble. Lena, a 31-year-old black woman and Ava's cousin, pushed through chairs. She said, "Breathe, Ava, focus on me." Ava felt a tide shove her toward the dais. Hale smiled, with rehearsal soft kindness and steel eyes. He said, "Truth has a way of coming home." A man in a cheap suit filmed her from the shadows. Ava saw the crescent birthmark on the projected shoulder. She heard her mother's old voice say, "Your father loved that moon." The hall smelled of roses, heat, and staged mercy. Ava steadied the tray, spine straightening like a drawn bow. She said, "I will not be your story." Hale's smile held, but his jaw tightened a notch. In the detergent sour service corridor, Ava pressed her forehead to cool tile. Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, steadied her shoulders and said, "He planned this." Ava said, "I'm a 28-year-old waitress, not a headline." Steam breathed from the kitchen door like a restless animal. She remembered tutoring kids after shifts because rent ate the day. She remembered her mother laughing and refusing to name her father. She said, "That birthmark is mine. Only family knew it." Lena said, "He used it to brand you on stage." The hum of dishwashers sounded like distant surf. Ava's phone buzzed with unknown numbers and predatory care. She said, "My life is tips and tired feet." He turned it into bait. Lena said, "We choose the next move." Ava pictured the shoebox of old photos under her bed. Her mother's scribbled notes had dates but no names. She said, "There was a lockbox she would never open." Lena said, "She told me once about a key in the sewing kit." Ava lifted her head and drew one deep, steady breath. She said, "We go home and we make this ours." Ava slid back to the ballroom's shadowed rim with plates held like shields. Donors pretended not to stare, which meant they stared with their throats. Senator Marcus Hale, a 58-year-old white male, basked under a spotlight. He said into the mic, "A family reunited by fate." Ava said under her breath, "By a trap." Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, kept close as if guarding a fuse. A man in a cheap suit, 30s and pale with nerves, filmed her openly. He winked like a stagehand who knew where the fire would start. Ava steadied a wobbling plate and let silence answer him. She caught the red tally light on the podium mic. A folded note rested beneath the mic like a coiled thread. Lena said, "That's not press, that's muscle." Ava said, "Then he works for our new father." The chandelier heat pressed sweat into her hairline. Music resumed, falsely cheerful like a laugh track. Hale's smile never cracked, but a vein trembled at his temple. Ava stacked silver and thought, "I will not shatter." She turned away and began counting exits instead of eyes. Near the kitchen swing door, the maître d', a harried man in his 40s, hissed, "Stay out of sight." Ava said, "I'm fine," and forced a smile that felt rented. Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, tugged her sleeve and leaned close. She said, "Your mother told me about a lockbox." Ava's heartbeat thudded like knuckles on wood. She said, "Key?" and feared the answer and wanted it anyway. Lena said, "She hid it in the sewing kit under your bed." Ava pictured plastic spools, bent needles, and a secret sleeping there. The door slapped back and forth, pumping heat and orders. Someone laughed hard at the head table, and then too long. Ava tasted metal and old questions in her mouth. She said, "He turned my life into a reveal." Lena said, "Then we will turn his into a record." The maitre d' waved someone else past and looked away. The moment became a small, bright room where decisions live. Ava nodded once, sharp and certain as a snapped thread. She said, "We finish the shift, then we open the past." Somewhere a glass broke, and nobody clapped. Now. Dessert landed like fragile planets, while Ava floated table to table. The cheap-suited man in his 30s slid beside her cart and grinned. He said, "Smile for the campaign." Ava, a 28-year-old Latina waitress, said, "I'm on the clock." His grin went flat, like paint drying too fast. He murmured, "You will be ours," and pocketed his phone. Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, materialized at Ava's elbow. She said, "He works for the senator." Ava said, "Then he's our weather report." The chandelier hum raised the room's temperature like a rumor. Hale, a 58-year-old white male, toasted again with fatherly ease. Ava steadied a tray and steadied her breath to match. She said, "He wants a script. We'll give him receipts." Lena said, "Shift ends soon. Secrets don't." The band hit a bright chord that landed wrong. Ava looked at the podium mic and imagined turning it on. She said, "Not yet," and kept moving through silk and teeth. The night smiled back, but its eyes were tired. The donor at table 4 asked for decaf and a miracle. Ava said, "Coffee is safer." She caught her reflection in a silver dome and hardly knew it. Lena said, "Home, then answers," and the promise held. Dawn slipped into the kitchen, tugging shadows off the table like tape. Ava, a 28-year-old Latina woman, set the cracked sewing kit down and said, "Please be real." Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, touched her sleeve and said, "Steady hands." Plastic latches snapped open with a tired sigh that felt like memory stretching. Bobbins rolled like tiny planets, and a brass key blinked up from lint. Ava said, "Mom hid light in small places." Paper rustled. A folded note waited with edges browned by years. Lena said, "Read it before courage cools." Ava unfolded the brittle square and breathed in starch and dust. She read, "If you're reading this, they came for your father again. Trust only Lena." Silence gathered, respectful as church. Ava said, she knew the storm's name. The fridge hummed like a low drum behind them. Lena said, "We start with the door this key belongs to." Ava placed the note flat, palm on the ink, as if blessing it. She said, "No more borrowed truths." The bed frame groaned like an old witness as Ava tugged the lockbox free. She said, "It waited where I sleep." Lena said, "Open what kept you safe and small." The brass key turned with a stubborn click, then gave up its posture. Inside lay faded photos, a cassette in a cracked case, and a clipping yellowed into butter. Ava said, "He kept records the world refused." The clipping's headline spat, "City Hall aide accused. Driver takes the fall." Lena said, "Driver means your father." Dust lifted, swirling like the past auditioning for air. Ava touched the cassette as if it might bruise. She said, "His voice is still here." The lockbox smelled of oil, paper, and a garage at night. Lena said, "We catalog, then we confront." Ava nodded, throat a tight door on softer rooms. She said, "No more guessing at silhouettes." The floor felt steady for the first time in days. The thrifted tape player blinked awake like a toy soldier remembering its orders. Ava said, "Ready," and pressed play. A rasping male voice filled the tiny kitchen, warm and unfinished. He said, "If anything happens, it's Hale. He paid me to drive. He paid me to disappear." Lena pressed her palm flat to the table as if bracing it. Ava said, "Dad, I hear you," and the words cracked at the hinge. The cassette hissed like rain over old pavement. The voice listed addresses, dates, routes through nights that smelled of gasoline and fear. Lena said, "He logged a map with breath." Ava replayed the first 10 seconds twice to memorize cadence. She said, "He believed truth could outlast him." The player clicked faintly, a metronome for the room's new pulse. Silence after the last syllable felt muscular, not empty. Lena said, "We treat this like a sworn statement." Ava nodded, eyes wet, spine tall. They spread the clipping flat and pinned the corners with coffee mugs. Ava said, "Fundraiser night mishap." Lena said, "A donor collapsed, A ledger vanished. A driver blamed. The print smelled like basement air and weathered truth. Margin notes in her mother's hand underlined names that now wore suits on billboards. Ava said he took the fall because he knew the route money traveled. The article framed rumor as caution and power as accident. Lena said, it names Hale without naming him. Ava traced the line about the missing ledger until paper warmed. She said, find the ledger, find the spine of this story. Outside, traffic muttered a civic lullaby. The clocks in their phones disagreed by a minute, but both urged motion. Lena said, cross-check dates against the tape. Ava stacked clipping, cassette index and photos into a clean pile. She said, we build in daylight so night can't edit us. The Beeline phone number still lived on the clipping, like a fossil with a heartbeat. Ava dialed and said, please pick up. A gravelly male voice answered, Mateo Perez. She said, I'm the driver's daughter. Silence crowded the line for a measured beat. Mateo said, then we talk now. Lena angled the phone to speaker, eyes bright and wary. Ava said, we have a tape, a note, and dates that fit the bones. Mateo said, bring copies, keep originals safe, meet me in daylight. The planner in Ava's head wrote the appointment in permanent ink. She said, today, cafe on 9th, back corner. Mateo said, I'll be the one limping and caffeinated. Laughter cracked the tension, and then sealed resolve. Lena said, if he runs late, we stay visible. Ava said, if he runs, we chase with facts. The call ended with a click that sounded like a green light. The cafe hid behind ivy and steam that fogged the front glass. Ava, a 28-year-old Latina woman, said corner table, and kept her back to the door. Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, said, sight lines first. Mateo arrived late, limping, ink on his fingers like proof. He said, Hale is clean on paper because he edits the paper. He slid a photocopy across the wood like a quiet siren. Columns listed speaking fees that walked through shell charities. Ava said, my father drove those envelopes, or the truth inside. Mateo said, both can ride in the same car. The room smelled of espresso and wet coats. Rain tapped time on the window and the copymaker's ghosts. Lena said, we corroborate dates against the tape. Mateo nodded once, then twice, building trust at the speed of fact. He said, I'll protect sources, not fantasies. Ava said, we bring receipts, not tears. He smiled like someone who has seen both become evidence. He said, then we start a spine and hang names on it. Mateo drew a rectangle on a napkin and labeled it story. He said, motive sells a headline, pattern keeps it alive. Ava said, why out me in public? Mateo said, Hale runs a family comeback arc. He tapped the napkin like a soft gavel. He said, you were the missing scene. Ava laughed once, sharp and tired like a cracked bell. She said, he thinks I'm grateful. Lena said, he thinks waitresses are props. Mateo said, he thinks he's untouchable. The espresso machine hissed like a stage snake. Ava traced the birthmark crescent on the napkin's edge. She said, he doesn't own the moon or my name. Mateo said, he owns time unless you pin him to dates. Lena said, we have dates. Ava said, we have a voice that names him. Mateo nodded as if filing a motion inside his skull. He said, we proceed with daylight, duplicates, and boring courage. A shadow cut their table as the cheap-suited man arrived. He was a male in his 30s, with a smile that didn't bend his eyes. He said, the senator would love a private chat. Mateo said, on the record. The man said, off it. Ava said, then no. True. He placed a card with only a time and address, like a dare. He said tonight, and his grin went flat as drywall. Lena said, you're not press. He said, everything is press if it cooperates. He turned, leaving cologne that tried to smell like cedar. Mateo said, they're testing for fear. Ava said they found aim. Rain thickened, writing on glass in fast cursive. The card lay between coffee rings like a coordinate. Lena leaned closer and memorized the numbers out loud. Ava said, "We meet on our terms or not at all." Mateo said, "We bring copies and witnesses, not hope." Back home, dust pooled in corners like ink finding seams. Ava set the cassette by the window and pressed play. Her father's voice rose, rough and careful as if carrying glass. He said, "If anything happens, it's hail." Dates followed like mile markers on a dark road. He named venues, donors, routes, and a ledger that mattered. Lena said he archived his courage so we could borrow it. The tape clicked, breathed, and resumed as if refusing to die. Ava said he kept receipts when the city forgot his face. Wind rubbed the screen and made a low cello in the room. She wrote times on sticky notes and stuck them to her arm. Lena said, "Map this against the clipping and the napkin." Ava said, "We built a spine, not a shrine." The player whirred, then stilled on a small exhale. Silence felt full, like a chapel after vows that took. She said, "We find the ledger, then we end the guessing." Mateo texted a warning that read like a headline stripped of art. He wrote, "Be careful. Hale uses family and then buries them." Ava typed, "Not this time," and hit send without blinking. Lena said, "We don't walk alone into a setup." Mateo replied, "Pick a public place if you must meet." Ava said, "We prepare, we record, we sit near exits." The cheap-suited man's card waited like a small dare on the fridge. Lena said, "He expects fear, not rules." Ava said, "We bring both and let rules drive." She packed the cassette copies and left originals with a neighbor. The hallway smelled of rain and curry and old carpets. Mateo texted, "If I'm late, start without me on camera." Ava smiled at the screen and didn't like the feeling. She said, "We keep our names, and we keep the tape." Lena said, "We also keep each other." The night outside gathered itself like a cloak they would wear. Resolve fit better than fear when the door finally shut. The bistro upstairs room smelled of polish and power. A single table waited under two sconces like bait on velvet. Ava said, "We meet in public, not in traps." Senator Marcus Hale stepped in alone, coat unbuttoned. He said, "Eva," with a father's softness sharpened by schedule. Lena hovered near the door, shoulders squared and quiet. Ava said, "You framed my father and fed the city a lie." Hale placed an envelope between plates, as if setting bread. He said, "You were lost to me. I'm correcting a wound." Ava said, "You're buying a headline with my face." The envelope breathed money and heat into the cold room. Hale smiled with teeth that never reached his eyes. He said, "I'm offering protection and a future with your name." Lena said, "Her name already works just fine." Hale's glance skipped over Lena like a cue he refused to hear. Ava said, "I want truth, not an allowance." The air thinned as if the ceiling had lowered to listen. Ava kept her hands in her lap and her back straight. She said, "You put me on a screen to own the ending." Hale's voice softened as if speaking to a skittish vote. He said, "I saved you a place at a table that matters." Lena said, "He saved himself a narrative that sells hope." Hale turned his glass a quarter inch and watched the ripple. He said, "Families are negotiated in rooms like this." Ava said, "My family was negotiated in a garage at night." The word, garage, darkened the space like a cloud. Hale's jaw ticked, then smoothed into practiced calm. He said, "Accept the support, and the past becomes manageable." Ava said, "I'm not a past you can file." The envelope waited, humming like a small engine. Lena stepped closer, a guardrail made of bone and stubbornness. Ava said, "You tried to premiere me without consent." Hale lifted his eyes, and finally measured her correctly. Hale leaned in until his flag pin caught the candle. He said, "Your father stole a ledger. I redirected the blame." Ava said, "He recorded your voice when you paid him to vanish." The candle flame jumped, small and honest. Hale said, "Tapes are quaint, Elections are now. He nudged the envelope, not hard, just enough to bruise air. Ava said, "You don't negotiate with ghosted drivers and their daughters." Lena said, "You negotiate with courtrooms and daylight." Hale's smile thinned to wire and held. He said, "You'll drown in the fallout before a jury can read." Ava pictured her father's handwriting steady as rain. She said, "We have copies, counsel, and a map you forgot." The room measured them like scales finding center. Hale looked at the door as if it had spoken his name. Ava did not blink. She said, "Keep the envelope, keep your storm." The door eased open, and Lena stepped in fully. She set a phone on speaker at the plate's edge like a badge. Mateo's voice filled the room, gravel and ink. He said, "We have the tape, Senator, and 2 backups already off-site." Hale did not touch the phone. He touched his cuff instead. He said, "You won't survive the noise this invites." Ava said, "We survived the silence it required." Mateo said, "Consider this a courtesy before publication." The hallway fan ticked like a slow metronome for truth. Lena said, "Walk away from the lie while your shoes are dry." Hale's gaze moved to the window, counting the rain. He said, "You think you're fireproof because you have a microphone." Ava said, "No, because we have names, dates, and a ledger." The candle guttered, then steadied like a verdict taking shape. Mateo said, "Sunrise stories travel farther." Hale rose and smoothed his jacket until the fabric forgot his fists. He said, "You'll call me when you see the storm arrive." Ava said, "We'll call a lawyer to watch it land." He left the envelope and a cologne that now smelled like gasoline. The door closed with the hush of a stage curtain retiring. Ava exhaled only when the hall swallowed his shoes. Lena said, "We bring him down, but we do it right." Ava said, "No leaks we can't defend, no quotes we can't prove." Mateo's voice, small on the table, said, "I'll be at the newsroom in 20. Ava touched the envelope once, the way you touch a stove to know. She said, "We document the bribe we refused." Rain pressed hands against the glass and did not ask to come in. Lena slipped the envelope into a clear bag and sealed it. Ava said, "Tonight, we write, and tomorrow we publish." The room felt taller now that the lie had left. The newsroom looked like a ship patched with tape and deadlines. Fluorescents hummed as if practicing cross-examination. Mateo, a late 40s Latino man, cleared a desk with his forearm. He said, "We verify, then we breathe." Ava, a 28-year-old Latina woman, set the cassette, the clipping, and the envelope bag down. She said, "We also document the bribe we refused." Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, opened a legal pad like a fresh window. She said, "Chain of custody starts now." Mateo pointed at a whiteboard skeleton labeled spine. He said, "Chapters by route, names strapped to date." Printers coughed like tired jurors. Ava said, "My father kept a ledger. He trusted paper over promises." Mateo said, "Paper outlives cologne." Lena photographed every item with timestamps that glowed. The room gathered its courage into folders and file names. Mateo said, "When fear knocks," handed a footnote. Ava nodded and found a steadier breath waiting for her. The salvage yard smelled like wet iron and old errands. A winch whined while gulls argued with distance. Mateo said, "Record everything, even the splinters." Ava, a 28-year-old Latina woman, pried the rusted sedan's trunk. She said, "He hid things where flats won't find them." Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, held a flashlight steady as law.u. The spare tire fought, and then surrendered, a wrapped oilcloth. Ava said, "Dad, please be the kind of careful I remember." She cut twine and unrolled a ledger that still believed in ink. Lena said, "Dates, amounts, signatures, shells with polite names." Mateo photographed each page before air could stain it. Ava traced her father's handwriting like a road home. She said, "Constellations of nights and favors." Rain ticked on the hood like a soft deadline. Mateo said, "We leave with copies. Originals, sleep off-site." The world tilted, but their hands stayed level. At the chain-link fence, A man in a cheap suit watched like a borrowed shadow. He was a male in his 30s, phone up, smile thin. Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, said, "We've got company." Ava, a 28-year-old Latina woman, slid the ledger into a tote that zipped like a verdict. Mateo said in the car, wheels before words. Gravel spat as tires caught purpose. The man's gaze promised a later scene with worse lighting. Ava said, "He thinks fear rides shotgun." Lena said, "It can jog behind us instead." The windshield gathered rain and flung it backward. Mateo said, "If he follows, we let a camera do introductions." Ava checked mirrors and saw a small smile at the fence. She said, "He wants us to know his face." Lena said, "Good, faces age in public." The highway opened like an option they had earned. Back in the newsroom, they made a quiet storm of evidence. Mateo, a late 40s Latino man, taped ledger scans to glass. He said, "Public filings are the chorus, your pages are the solo." Ava, a 28-year-old Latina woman, cross-referenced dates with the cassette index. She said, "Roots overlap donations like fingerprints." Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, built a timeline that clicked. She said, "When money moved, so did favors." A map on the wall turned into a confession written in dots. Printers spit out confirmations like subdued applause. Mateo said, "We allege only what the paper can prove." Ava said, "He bought votes with grief and receipts." The editor poked her head in, eyes skeptical and bright. She said, "Second source on the shelves." Lena lifted a signed affidavit like a clean blade. The room felt suddenly taller, as if facts added ceiling beams. Midnight arrived with polite shoes. The glass doors sighed, and 3 men in suits walked in smiling. The cheap-suited man, a male in his 30s, led like a clerk of storms. He said, "We're here to discuss corrections." Mateo, a late 40s Latino man, said, "We prefer edits after publication." Ava, a 28-year-old Latina woman, stepped so the cameras saw everyone. Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, slid the ledger copy into a sealed folder. The men kept smiling, but their eyes grew arithmetic. The emergency exit sign glowed like a little judge. The sprinkler pipes hummed a threat above them. The man said, "We can keep families whole." Ava said, "We can keep records whole." Mateo held his phone up, red light winking like a truth serum. Silence stretched thin, then thinner, then didn't break. The men glanced at the ceiling as if weather were negotiable. The newsroom air sharpened as the cheap-suited man stepped closer, flanked by his 2 companions. Ava, a 28-year-old Latina woman, said, "This is a newspaper, not your stage." He, a man in his 30s, replied, "Everything is a stage if you own the script." Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, moved the ledger copy behind her like a shield. Mateo, a late 40s Latino man, held his phone high, red light blinking. He said, "Name and company for the record." The man's smile thinned to a blade. Ava said, "We're not cutting this scene for you." One of the suits shifted weight, the carpet sighing under leather soles. Lena's stance didn't change. Mateo's thumb hovered near the emergency send. The hum of the old AC sounded like a countdown. The man looked at the phone, then at Ava, calculating which lens mattered more. She didn't blink. The fire alarm blared without warning. Lena's doing. Sprinklers hissed alive, dousing hair, papers, and plans. The suits cursed as their jackets darkened. Ava laughed, sharp and bright under the downpour. She shouted, "See you in the morning news." Mateo said, "That's our headline." Water streaked across ledger copies sealed in plastic. The cheap-suited man glared through the spray, his smirk drowned. Lena stood still, letting the water run down her jaw like armor. The fluorescent light shimmered on falling drops. Printers coughed steam before dying. The men backed toward the exit, shoes squealing on wet tile. Ava said, "Next time, bring an umbrella and the truth." The fire bell kept swinging its metal voice into the night. At 3 a.m., the ledger lay open on the last page. Ava's finger stopped on a name she knew. Lena's. She said, "What is this?" her tone flat as a gavel. Lena closed her eyes. She said, "I took money to keep you away from the story years ago. I thought I was protecting you." Mateo's gaze flicked between them, silent witness. The rain from their clothes still darkened the carpet. Ava said, "You knew pieces and hid them." Lena said, "I hid you." Ava's chest felt like a drawer jammed with grief. She pushed back from the table. Silence filled the gap, heavy but unbroken. Lena's shoulders squared against her own confession. Ava looked at the ink again, the letters refusing to fade. Ava said, "You hid them." Lena replied, "I hid you." Her voice carried both defense and apology. Mateo, gentle but firm, said, "The truth includes this too." Ava's anger cracked just enough to let ache through. Years of shared rooms, meals, and losses rearranged themselves into something messier but truer. The printer still dripped water onto the floor, marking seconds like a slow clock. Ava said, "We testify together or not at all." Lena met her eyes and didn't flinch. Mateo said, "If you're both in, I can anchor the piece with that." Ava nodded, decision sealing in her jawline. Outside, dawn pressed its first gray note against the window. Lena straightened and wiped water from her lashes. She said, "Put my name in your story, I'll testify." Ava's mouth softened, but her spine stayed tall. She said, "If we fall together." Mateo said, "Then let's build the drop right." Outside, the first birds coughed sound into the air. The ledger lay between them, pages curling at the edges. Ava touched its cover, not to claim it, but to promise it would speak. Lena rested her palm on top of hers. The moment bound them like a legal seal. Mateo exhaled, shoulders dropping for the first time that night. The city's hum began to rise, steady and unhurried. Ava said, "We're ready for the light." Morning broke like a verdict across the newsroom windows. How? Mateo, a late 40s Latino man, hit publish with a deliberate tap. Ava, a 28-year-old Latina woman, watched headlines blossom online. Tapes, ledger scans, dates, names. Lena, a 31-year-old black woman, leaned over her shoulder, reading comments ignite. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras like a forest of eyes. Hale, a 58-year-old white man, faced the press and said, "These are distortions." A voice shouted, "What about the driver?" Hale replied, "A tragedy." Ava whispered, "A cover," and stepped toward the microphones. The crowd surged with questions, her name bouncing between lenses. The air smelled of coffee, asphalt, and adrenaline. Mateo said, "You're in it now." Ava said, "I've been in it for years. Now it's just louder." Inside the courthouse, marble floors echoed every step. Ava faced Hale as he swept past with aides. She said, "Say my father's name." Hale paused, jaw tightening, then said, "Luis Romero." Ava replied, "He was a man, not a disposal system." Gasps rippled through the hall. Reporters scribbled faster. Cameras leaned in. The scent of polished stone and old paper hung in the air. Lena stood just behind Ava, a steady presence in the frame. Hale adjusted his cuff, but didn't meet her eyes again. Ava turned away first, choosing her own exit. The click of her shoes was the only sound until the press resumed their questions. Outside Hale's campaign headquarters, agents and windbreakers carried boxes marked evidence. Mateo said, "Paper leaves footprints." Lena handed Ava a ledger copy with her own name circled. She said, "I'll testify today." Ava's throat tightened, pride and grief tangled. The street smelled of diesel from idling news vans. Halloween. Passers-by stopped, some cheering, some silent. One agent nodded to Ava as he passed with a box. She said, "We end it." Mateo said, "This is the part they can't spin." The building loomed behind them, its glass front suddenly less reflective. The hearing room smelled of varnished wood and anticipation. The cheap-suited man, a male in his 30s, sat at the witness table, cracking under questions. He admitted to fabricating donations. Anwar. Lena testified next, her voice clear as a courtroom clock. Ava followed, recounting her father and the night he didn't come home. Each word felt carved in the air. Hale sat at the defense table, conferring with counsel, his posture smaller than the suit he wore. Pens scratched, cameras clicked, history aligned itself with ink. Evening cooled the city as Ava stepped out of the courthouse. Cameras flashed, but they no longer felt like weapons. People on the sidewalk said her father's name with respect. Lena asked, "Dinner?" Ava smiled, "Somewhere without chandeliers." They walked toward a quieter street, shoulders brushing. The sky turned gold at the edges, and traffic thinned. Ava felt the weight of secrets lift, leaving only the shape of her own name. She said softly, "I'm not your secret anymore." The city didn't answer, but it listened.